is to understand the basics and think through the design principles and the basics of the architecture that we need to think when we are doing the data management, and understand what are the benefits that we get from Dataverse and what are the things that we had to be careful as we use Dataverse. So we had to question ourselves, are we using Dataverse in the right place? I'm Geeta Chokalingam and I have Jeevarajan with me. So we both are going to present today, and credits to Microsoft Fast Track team for giving us the beautiful content. I am working in Avanade and I'm a group project manager. That's a quick, quick intro about myself. And here is the agenda.
Geeta, sorry to interrupt you. You are sharing the presenter screen, not the slideshow one.
Yeah. Are you able to see my screen around the agenda?
Yeah, but you're sharing the presenter screen. I think the slideshow is in other monitor, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yes. So
Just give me.
yeah, it's the PowerPoint presentation mode. It always catches everyone off, doesn't it? That one, the PowerPoint presentation mode. It always catches. That's fine. Yep, we can see your slide now. Thank you.
So we are going to see the agenda. Here's a quick recap of what I just spoke. We had to understand the data strategy, and then what is our cloud approach with data, and then the T-SQL data access that we might have. I might not cover T-SQL data access in great in turn, but rather we will just go ahead and talk about the data strategy, which forms the basics of the data management that we have in any storage for that matter. As we see today, what are the different data that we work with? Like, we have so much of data that we work with, and, like we have social data, we have customer data, we have analytics data. So what do we do with all this? Capturing so much of data brings a lot of data inside our system. Should we bring it into our operational system, or should we bring it into our analytics system? That's a big question. Which storage suits for which purpose? So our purpose should be the driving factor for determining our storage. So we need to have a clear strategy around it. And then when it comes to cloud storage, we had to be extra careful because we have to be clear on who does what with the data that we capture. So let's deep dive into our data strategy. Usually what we do from the data that we capture, because we are talking about Power Platform and Dynamics 365 and Dataverse, which is tightly coupled with both of these applications, what do we generally intend to do? We need to get the knowledge of meaning about a customer or about a product, or for that matter, any data that we handle. And then we need to have a process around it so that it's being handled properly. And then we will try to have some insights so that we make some informed decisions out of that data. So end of day, whatever application it might be, these three are the major pillars which we would concentrate on the data that's being captured at the back end, right? So as we handle different data, we have the master data, transactional data, and inferred data. So the master data are the general data. If you are already aware about Dynamics 365 and the common data model, as we call it, we have the company data, contact data, account holdings, all this being predefined, which will form our master data. And transactional data, in this matter, it could be, a chat that I do with a customer, or it could be, whatever communications, like my email communications or my personal letters that I would have sent to the, it couldn't be a personal letter, but ideally any communication that I would do. It could be a postal mail or it could be an email. All that history we would need. And then any banking transactions, like, if you are putting in a Power Apps as kind of a POS system, then you would have your retail transactions or banking transactions that's been recorded at a high level. And then your IoT transactions that comes into your system, right? We have field service. So end of day, it uses the same database, and then we have IoT transactions coming in. So these are all the transactional data that we might get. Even our social listening tools might give in data of the complaints or the achievements or the appreciations from the customer to do sentiment analysis and further. Right. So these are the transactional data that any application would get in. And infer data is like you get a data, the social listening that I was talking about, like somebody has posted, but you can't just use the post as is, but we have to make some sense out of the data for us to use that data within the application. Like, yeah, the customer is very happy. This, you need to understand the sentiment. Like, he is totally upset with whatever has happened. And then accordingly use that to make some decisions. And, accordingly, you push some marketing material or like, some discount to that user to make him happy or him or her happy. So these are the inferred data, right? So we have so much of data that we handle nowadays. And in fact, when we are talking about D365 or for that matter, Power Apps, we used to have all of this data. So yes, so much of data, the volume gets increased, and as you increase and as you have an increased volume, the data latency becomes an issue. Like how well you're able to access your data and when, right? We are in the world of digital communication, right? Anything and everything, you don't really go right into a paper. So like you do a WhatsApp chat, or you do nowadays, even the project management is being handled over WhatsApp or Teams, right? Teams is like has become integral part of our life. So everything, every communication has become digital. So the data latency also has to be taken into consideration. And when we have AI and IoT, think of the data volume that we might have to handle, and higher volumes becomes essential for to have more insights than the essential data that you might capture in any application as such, right? And when we are talking about all this data, we might have different perspectives to use this data, right? Like I would want to view the data, but when you view the data, it means that I take a snapshot of the data. As a human, I would definitely not be able to crunch all of the data that is being given in a view. So when the data volumes increase, um, working on the data being given as a view in your UI becomes difficult. So what we need to do, we might have to think about insights, right? So you just process all of the data and then just get some insights out of it. That's one way of going about it when your data volumes increase. Or you might have to do some automated actions based on your data. Like you get some data, like you did, you just got to know that your sales order has progressed to a position wherein you had to send an invoice. So you might automate the process after doing the verifications in your internal systems, and then you can automate the event. So this becomes like, depending on the event, you automate the actions that has to happen. An advanced version of this action could be like you are doing a social listening, and then you get to know the customer is not happy about it. That's an inferred data that comes into your system. So you can automate this action by sending some discount offers or anything that might be useful. So when we are talking about all this, right, what it means is you are turning data into value, business value, because that might be the value proposition based on which any business would do. technically, if I go and talk to any person, yeah, I have 10 years of data and I know what this customer wants, like, the customer needs, he's always interested in buying this brand and, between this price range. Like I am inferring something out of all the data that I've captured across, a certain period of time so that I would make some better decisions and I would be able to forecast it better. Right. So these are the insights. So we need to add business value. So if I had to put it in the right way, when we are talking about data strategy, we have four components, right? That we have to be very much clear. And whatever data storage that we are using, we had to see how much we are aligned towards it. Like the business strategy, you need to have clear strategy, data strategy that aligns with your business strategy. Like you want to keep your data storage cost low. That is, you might have a threshold which the organizations might keep depending on their appetite, and you would want to keep the data storage cost low. In which case, your operational data store, like for example, SQL, your your Dataverse, you cannot store years and years of data into your Dataverse. That's not the right way of doing it, because the objective of Dataverse is not to store analytical data. So you might want to consider archiving your data beyond a certain point, which is like a process that you might need to have in place for you to align with the business strategy that you have. So you might have to have that clear goals and measurable objectives against these goals. Then the next major thing that we have to consider when we are thinking about data strategy are the organizational roles. Every person who handles data is involved in this. So we might have to have a clear documentation of who does what with the data so that we avoid the same operations being handled again and again. Like we might avoid duplication. So we need, like, for example, account relationship manager will play a role in collecting the data about the account. Sales manager might need an analytics role, might play an analytics role, like whatever data that's being captured by the customer service agent, by the account relationship manager, he might get an insights into it, like analytics into it, and then he might work based on that. The database administrator will be more involved in safeguarding the data and guarding your principles and maintenance of the data. Then you had to consider the data architecture, um, because these are the tools and processes that will allow you to work with the data. You can't go for the tools that would not adhere to the latency expectations and the inference that you would do from the storage that you have got. So you might need to have the right tools and right processes in place for you to work with the data. So you might have to define that data architecture. Even if you're planning to use a Dataverse, you had to be clear what tools and processes might help this particular customer, because not every customer would need an SSIS with the Kingspace tool or Scribe for that matter. You may not be going with all these tools by default. If it's a very small scale industry, that would be too much for that customer. So customer to customer and the maturity, depending on the maturity of the customer, you might have to determine the tools and processes. It shouldn't be overburdened, and it shouldn't be like way lesser than you. We cannot be going with out of the box import when you have 1 TB of data that you had to bring it onto the Dataverse. The data management is the other factor that we have to consider in place. Like data management is the foundation of data management is data governance, like who does what with the data, right? So that we have the quality and security of data being maintained appropriately. Be it SQL, be it Dataverse, or be it any other storage for that matter, we need to have this data management. And when it comes to cloud data storage, we need to ensure that the encryption rules are being followed and you have an archival mechanism in place. So this data governance will become the foundation of this data management. So these three are the major things that we had to consider with any data storage. And as we see, we would be able to, easily correlate from our previous sessions how Dataverse helps in each of these areas. So let me go ahead, and talk about the design issues that we typically might have with any while we go in with Dataverse. Like treating Microsoft Dataverse as an infinitely scalable black box. Like we always go with the misconception that we use the data flows and processes to integrate, and we also we also design the integration with the consideration that we should always do it with the low code. No, sometimes an API might be the best option to integrate, and the Power Automate flows or the internal workflows might not help. Yeah, those are the low code, no code options that we have, but not essentially that would fit into an enterprise architecture. So in which case we might have to rethink on what are the integration methods that we need to think to process the data volume that we have, and the data security that we have. We need to think all of this. Then the next thing is, when it comes to heavy processing, uh, are we planning to use Microsoft Dataverse? Is it the right platform to consider? Because Microsoft Dataverse is not a place where you should do the ETL, extract, transact, meaning transform and load. That's not the right candidate if you are thinking about it in that way. And like you if you wanted it to work like I've seen in some places, in some customers, like customer place where it's been considered like an event hub. Like the data comes into this place, and then from here it has to orchestrate the rest of the processes. Maybe Dataverse is not the essential place to orchestrate this. Rather, you had to consider a proper orchestration tool uh, instead of considering a Dataverse. And you should not be storing unnecessary data when you are considering a Dataverse for a Power Apps application wherein you are just doing an application processing. Then we might need to restrict whatever data that is required for this application processing, and not bring in the legacy data into this application just to have a view. Rather, you might even consider a Power BI, which would unite the data from this Dataverse with the legacy application data and then give you that view, whatever is required. But we should not be bringing in that unnecessary data. And last but not the least, Dataverse is not a data lake or a data warehouse. So we might not be thinking of Dataverse to be used as a place where we do the ingestion and then transformation and then getting the insights. If you really want to do that from the customer perspective, consider customer insights, but not a Dataverse. So these are the typical design issues that we might need to have in place. Maybe the customer can start the journey having a Dataverse in place, but as it matures, we need to have a design in place which scales and matches that enterprise grade level. So if we think the customer is already an enterprise grade, then we need to have our integration and the data platforms being already predefined, so that we would be able to extract the data from Dataverse and then push it into the data warehouse or the data lake at a later time, so that as they are bringing in their data warehouse, it is scalable, and we are using the right platform for the right use. So we need to have this good design behavior in each of this areas: view, insight, action, and analysis. We already covered about view, insight, and action. What do we do about data in terms of these areas? And analysis is the last place wherein you do the analysis of the data. You bring in all of this data, and then you do an analysis. Like customer insights is one such place, and Power BI is a robust solution that you can think of. if you had to bind data from different sources, and it's not essential to give, and in place where it's not essential to give a customer 360, but rather get a consolidated view of data from different sources, then Power BI is a good tool to consider. So when we are talking about all these design issues, we have already covered like what are the things that we should think about when we are doing the design, and what's the right approach to go when to just think about when we are when we are in the design phase. We also need to think about the solution checker, like that encourages the good behavior, or that's a good practice for every person to follow, whoever is building the application. And then the API limits, because the API limits plays an essential role when you are talking about the integration. Because and also the user behavior, like one user logging in at a peak hour and blocking in the performance so that the entire system goes down, that may not be acceptable, right? And in fact, when it goes to cloud, one instance or one environment which can impact the other environment becomes even more um, unstoppable. And like it is like if it is in an unstoppable manner, it becomes really impactful. So we need to have these limits, and we can see how it helps. We do have API limits, throttle limits at the level of every user request, and also at the batch request level. So these are essentially provided at the Dataverse platform. Sorry, the solution checker is one other feature that we have in Dataverse, which helps us to have a sanity check of what version of solution that we are using, and to enforce that good behavior amongst all the developers, or low code no code developers as well. Product design, like we might need to consider to use the managed solutions, how do we manage our code, the DevOps, and the inbuilt options that comes in robust along with Azure, and Azure services and the Dataverse platform. So we might have to combine all of these features for us to have a robust strategy and architecture. So here are some examples like of tools. I would say not examples, but the tools that we need to consider in each of this area. So Microsoft Dataverse is like a place where you store and you get the data insight, like on your operational data, not into your analytical data. Analytical data, it should come from your ADLS, like Azure Data Lake Storage, right? Which is the data warehouse. So Power Automate is the place wherein you do your process integration when you wanted your event architecture, event-based architecture to be used to do some actions. It could be internal or external systems. Using the connectors that are available within Power Automate, we can think of. But as I said earlier, Power Automate is not essentially the thing to do always. You should also be thinking about Azure functions, or APIs that might help you better in certain scenarios when compared to Power Automate. Power BI is the robust tool that will help you to get insights and do analysis on data from multiple sources. Customer Insights is the tool that we might need to think from Microsoft, which would give us insights and generate a customer 360. If the analysis is on any other data, Power BI is a great tool to consider. So common data models. So we do have a comparison of SQL versus Dataverse down the line in other slides. So the basic and the crux of this Dataverse is that we have a predefined common data model built within this, which means based on the industry, they have predefined globally. Microsoft has defined these are the basic data model that would be required. So any person who starts the journey who do not have strong data background, they would be eventually be benefited by this because the data model is being predefined. So your go-to-market will be faster utilizing or leveraging these data models. And the next factor is that this data model is being safeguarded with a security model that's being built so that every access from each of this entity or the table is being safeguarded by the security model. That's very much essential when we are talking about cloud data, as I said earlier, right? So that's been enabled in Dataverse. So in which case we are just ensuring the data management with this Dataverse. So yeah, I already covered about this. What's a common data model? So I'm just moving ahead. The data and access. So we do have data and we have to consider who accesses what when it comes to data management, right? So in this place, we do have security roles that comes in line with Dataverse, which could help us restrict the low level row level security, and we can also deep dive at the field level security. So that's the detail to which we can dive in with the security that's been enabled with the CDM and Dataverse features that we have. So we have covered about the data management options that lies within the platform. And now it's time to think about the integration patterns that we need to be careful about. So we have three areas where we need to be considering this because these are the places where we would be handling data, right? First is a user interface, and then we would have data integration, and then the process integration. So user interface is like, you embed a different app, a canvas driven app into your app. So you need to be careful about how do you handle the data within these embedded apps. And then how do you provide access from the UI to the user? Because if we give too much of data, more than the intended activity that the user would do, it actually impacts user adoption. And also, like, we have to be careful about how we are structuring the UI so that the data is being structured where the data capture will be done appropriately without missing any essential ones. And we do have the features internally, which Jiva will cover in detail, like what are the features that helps us to ensure the integrity of the data that we had to capture in our UI, and the business rules that we can meaning enforce on the data that's been captured as well. So the data integration, we have multiple options. As I said, it can be a point-to-point connection, or it can be your service bus, wherein you just have a subscribe method, wherein you would want to push this data from Dataverse to multiple parties who would be utilizing this data. So when we are doing a data integration with the Dataverse, we had to be careful uh, who are the target people who would be utilizing this data. Accordingly, we might have to plan our integration. Process integration is the place where we would actually handle the process, like based on the event you wanted something to do with the data. Then we might have to think whether it could be an API or Power Automate, or whether it needs to happen in a customer insight. Yeah. So data integration, server side, event based, batch based, I think at a high level, you would be able to see the pull model that meaning I'm just covering the outbound first. So when you are sending in the data from the system to the other systems, like if it's event based, then you would be doing the batch processing at the staging area, and it should be asynchronous if it's event based. If it's batch based, it's better to like we do the pull model, so that you are pulling in the data, like you have an API which pulls in the data and then exposes it out. In case of inbound, event based, we would do it near real time, like somebody submits an application from within the portal, and you would want that to flow into the system, so that you just get your data and then processes it. And then if you wanted to do a straight through processing with the data, then you would use a process architecture like a Power Automate or an API to further push down that data to other the core systems. Like in case of a banking, you would get the data, you would capture the data from within your Canvas app. Like when you walk into a bank, your relationship manager would get in all the details from you, and then he might submit the data. As soon as that happens, it can be near real time. It do not need to be a synchronous flow. So we had to select what kind of integration is required, so that this data integration doesn't bog down the application. So in such places, we just go ahead and do a near real time, which is an asynchronous call to the APIs, which would in turn talk to our legacy system, wherein the customer checks would be background verification checks would be done, and then the customer is being further accounts are being created for this customer. So that's an event-based inbound flow that we could think of. And then the batch-based, how do you handle the batch? So here is a place where we would use the API limits, where the API limits and throttle limits come into picture. The performance throughput are the ones that we need to be careful about when we are talking about all this integration, data integration. As I said earlier, API limits are being enforced within Dataverse, because you need to have the user-based throttling, so that any user who extensively uses it, like somebody tries to import a data like voluminous data during the peak hours, then yeah, if we have a throttle, automatically it would cut off, and then so that the performance is not being impacted. API user also goes by the API throttle limits that we would have. Since this all is being enabled by the platform, it makes our life easier. That's where Dataverse comes into picture, like the features that gives us easy access. API limits, I think I've just flashed the links that can help you to have details about each of this limit, and what are the throttle limits that we would have with each of this. Fault tolerance. This is the place where our integration patterns identify failures. So this is something that we also need to be careful, even when we are using service bus integration, or we are doing a point-to-point integration. We need to have retry back-off logic, and even with the retry, it cannot be endless. We need to have a limit beyond which we do a circuit breaker, and then push it into a queue, and then take it later, and then we might have a manual intervention to check the data and then process it again. So we need to have all these integration patterns, and to have enduring failures, like it's better to go in for an asynchronous processes, wherein you combine the Azure bars, or the other event hub that are available with Azure services, so that you queue in, and then you just consume that data from Azure services, and then do the actions within Dataverse. So these are the ones that we need to be considering in our design. Now, when it comes to integration, analytical integration, like operational reporting, Dataverse gives you the views, charts, dashboards, And you could also do NSSRS reports and Power BI reports. If it's a self-service BI, like you have your own Excel sheet and you would just want to import that data and create a report out of it, you would be able to do it with the out-of-the-box data import option, and then you could do a reporting from within Dataverse. If it is from OData feeds, then possibly Power BI is the best option. Enterprise BI is the place where we were talking about putting it into data lake or a data warehouse. You queue it into a service bus, which accumulates all the data from all the systems into the data lake, and then you could have a deep insight into your data. So yeah, this is again the different tools that we have for the analysis solution. And since we have already covered in detail, I'm just going ahead. And these are the Azure services that, combined with Common Data Model, helps the low-code, no-code platform users to get great benefit out of your transactional data. Now we have come to a good part of it. We know SQL Server and we know Dataverse, and what's the difference and when to go in for what. Like SQL Server is like a rich database engine feature, like as we all have worked with SQL Server for a long time. It's a robust database that we know, or a data platform that we know in the history, which would give us, the stored procedures, triggers, and, if we have to do it within a secured on-premise environment, yes, SQL Server is a great option to go for. And this skill is readily available. And we have standard tools that helps us to do the backup restore, and querying the data from SQL is easier, and sharing the data from the same database is easier when it comes to SQL Server. When it comes to Dataverse, yes, it makes our life easier. It has low-code, no-code platform support. And the common data model with advanced field types, we have currency, email. So all these default data types helps us to ensure the data validity without doing any extra effort. So those are the major, benefits or advantages of using a common data model that's available with Dataverse. And we have .NET and web-based APIs to access these Dataverse programmatically, in which case the granular security model that is being enabled with Dataverse takes care of the data access when we are accessing it programmatically, or be it via a fetch XML query, right? The secured access to data views will be always applying the security, and the downside of it is that we cannot use a stored procedure or triggers. Yes, for obvious reasons, because it's in cloud storage. And it's implicitly attached to an environment. So when we have a Dataverse, it's being attached to an environment. That's a reason because of which we are not allowed to do beyond a certain point, as we would do with the SQL Server. And we would need special skills when we have to do fetch XML query and Dynamics 365. So this is a good comparison between SQL Server and Dataverse. Now it's time that we deep dive into the Dataverse features that we have and have a closer look on how we would use them. Over to you, Jiva.
Hey, thank you, Geeta. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, we don't have much time, to be honest. Let's see. Okay. Okay, folks. Let me know once you're able to see the screen. Hope you guys can see it. Yeah. Geeta, can you confirm if you can see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, again, thank you so much for joining today. I have exactly 20 minutes. I'll try to cover as much as possible. And please stop me and ask me, please drop any questions if you have in the chat, and we'll try to answer it, maybe after the session as well. We'll be online for a few minutes, and well, I'll be available throughout this day, and Geeta will be available as well for a few minutes and to help you to answer the questions. So with that, I'm Jeevarajan Kumar. I'm connecting from Singapore. I'm working as a solution architect at Avanar. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in business applications. And yeah, so with that, let me just quickly go to the next one. So yeah, so Geeta has actually given such an overview on what exactly the Dataverse and data management and what are the different features and parts of that. So what we're going to see quickly today, now is to see the features of this Dataverse and what exactly the Dataverse offers to us and how we can leverage them to tailor to make it tailor-made for our business. So the first thing would be, of course, I'll be starting with security. So as you can see, the security layer basically that handles the authentication with Azure Active Directory to allow for the conditional access and multi-factor authentication. So basically, the security supports authorization down to the row and field level, and it provides rich auditing capabilities as well. So we're going to focus few of the slides after this on this part, the authorization part, and the auditing part. Apart from that, we'll see a couple of the features as well. Yeah, and the next one is going to be the logic. So logic basically allows us to easily apply the business logic at the data level. So the Dataverse offers such beautiful features that like business rules, which basically help us to avoid writing scripts and some part of plugins as well with for certain use cases, and like duplicate detection and jobs, and then calculated role of fields, plugins, and workflows. So provided with a given time, we'll be focusing on this authorization and auditing and calculated role of fields, business rules for today. And after the logic, we will have data. So where which was covered by Geeta extensively. So basically, Dataverse offers how to control and shape our data, and how to discover and model or validate and build a report on top of our data. So this control, basically the whole data control ensures that our data looks the way exactly we wanted, and how irrespective of how it is used behind the scene. And then the storage part of it comes in. So where the Dataverse stores your physical data in Azure, as we know, and this cloud storage basically removes the burden of worrying about where the data is going to be stored, how it scales, and what happens if it's a server's downtime or anything like that. And Microsoft takes care of that. And you see the variety of options that basically Dataverse offers, which is being used for different scenarios. And then finally, we will have an integration layer, where basically the Dataverse helps us to connect in different ways to support our business needs, like web APIs, web hooks, and event handling and event frameworks, and data export services. So all those services, all those integration points to basically connect with the Dataverse data, and for as per our business requirement. So with that, I just a quick walkthrough on the Dataverse security features, right? So it's going to be the key part when it comes to Dataverse. It's all so security is the key one, and you can see the data basically in a table, or can be organized, and it can be given to a owner. It can be assigned to a owner, or who can be a team or a user, basically, and the team can, and which will be done by our security roles, which we'll see shortly. But at high level, I can what I'm trying to show here is you will have organization access-wise data that can be accessed via organization level, which is basically applies for everyone, and it can be accessed by within business scoped within the business unit level as well. So where typically we do the segregation based on the region or business area, and we create the business units accordingly, and the data access will be limited within or scoped within that particular business unit. And when it comes to an individual owner or so individual record, either the ownership can be for a team, or can be for a user, individual users. And we're going to see each of them in detail in next slides. And there also can be explicit sharing in case of an exemption, or in case of someone is going on, like let's say someone is going on leave or something, they want to share it to someone else to pick it up and work. And that's where the individual sharing comes in. And next thing is the field level security. So this field level security basically it's one level granular, where within the record you will be able to mask certain fields which are only meant to be accessed by certain people. So even though the record is accessed for everyone, so that's where this high level things comes in. And you can see it's record sharing access team is recommended. So we had a previous session where we were talking about the principle object access table, and when we do record sharing, we have to be careful because there's going to be an entry created in that table for every single time, and the access team basically helps to resolve that and minimize that. And the auditing will basically help us to see what has been done and what we need to do based on what has been done, right? And so yeah, stepping into the security role. So basically, to assign these privileges to to give the access to the record, we need to basically have a security roles. So what happens is the security role comes on the next level after. When you have the first level will be, of course, the app access itself, where you need to have licenses and you need to be added to the Azure AD as a user in case of online. And then that after that you need to define the security roles and need to assign the security roles as a next level. So with that, we will have, if you can, I don't know whether you can see it or not. You can zoom in. Yeah, so you can see the security roles. We have this four different types, where either it can be a none, which means if let's say if I'm configuring a security role called account manager. So in this case, I'm saying that if we take an example as an account, so if I give like this, which means it's a business unit. So what does that mean? Basically this the users who or teams whoever has this security role can basically access all the records, or can basically create the records within the business unit level, and they can read all the records across the organization level. Okay, so this is basically for organization, and this is within the user level, and this is within the parent-child business unit level. So what does it mean? If you take this as an example, if let's say a user belongs to this particular business unit, and that business unit belongs to this particular parent business unit, and that has a parent as A, and then this is like cross business unit, right? So if I have a user as a within a business unit level, I can access all the business units records within this, and if I have a parent-child business units level, I can access all the records within here. Yeah, and then if I have an organizational access, I can access all the records that's been assigned to across my organization. So that's what it defines in this chart here. And if I go to the definition, and that's what I just explained now. So if I put a global, which is also called organization level, everyone can, a person or a team or a user can access all the records across this organization. And if I put a parent-child, it's only within this. If it's business unit, only within this. If it's user level, it's only within this. Whichever the record he has created, he or she wants, will be having access to that. So it's a huge concept, and to be honest, the security itself takes an hard to explain in detail. So I know I'm rushing up because I need to cover other features, core features of the Dataverse as well. So with that, the next thing is record sharing. So the sharing of the record is, once you can have security roles, and let's say you have assigned the security roles to user and team, and they will be having access. On top of that, the record sharing can be done as an exception mechanism, and definitely it affects the performance, as each sharing is going to be creating a record in the principal object access table, and it's not highly recommended to share using share feature often unless until it's required, and it's definitely administrative overhead. And there's one more concept in Dataverse called field level security, which I just given heads up. So in this case, if you take a scenario where a certain users typically used to basically prevent high impact business fields, or business fields that or the fields that deals with social security numbers, identification numbers, or card numbers, something like that. So what we do is, even though the users who basically works with let's say accounts and contact, they do have access for accounts and contacts, but we want to mask that specific fields in such a way we will be creating a field security profile, so that only who like someone like their boss or someone, only they will have access to see those fields. Otherwise the normal users or the sales representatives will not have access to see them. In that case, you can use field security profile. And then, so basically how we do is we create a field security profile, and that profile will be configured against, to have these three access, whether read access or create or update. So if I put if I give read access, and what happens is once the profile is given to that, once the user or team is added to that profile, and if the profile has read access, so basically I can read that sensitive data, but I cannot modify it. And if I give and create access, basically the users who has this field security profile mapped to them can basically enter the data when the record is created. If I have update, well, after creation, still I can update as well. So that if you have all these three, basically you have full rights to create, update, and read. And with that, the next one, quickly if I go, it's going to be hierarchy security. So this is another level of security model. So you can see the typical, if I take a sales scenario, and you will have a CEO and then VP of sales and then a VP of service right here, and then sales managers and sales people under them. So what happens is when we set up users, we do set up the hierarchy of the users as well. So eventually the manager hierarchy, security will work on that. So if I want to see if the sales manager wants to see all the records that the sales team under him or her, basically we can use leverage the manager hierarchy. And then if let's say, and then there's one more hierarchy security called position hierarchy, which is basically it doesn't follow the hierarchy as it is here. Let's say if you want to have like this case, like if you have managers or sales, and basically they want to see across the different teams, still they can do that as well. And basically this will be used in scenarios where support service or service center scenarios where a manager of one team need to access the tickets that his team is getting, and sometimes he still wants to see the other team's performance as well, how they are doing. He can have this kind of thing. But usually, in case of a financial institution or financial based products or service, it might not be the case, where only the managers will be given access. So in those cases, manager security will be helpful. Yeah, and then the next one is the as part of the ownership, there can be two different type of ownership, like a user level ownership or a team based ownership. So which I was talking earlier. So once we have set that security roles, we can basically assign the security roles to the individual user or to a team. So the individual user is definitely quick and fast, but it's gonna, for each and every user you have to set it, right? And which is definitely, I mean, in real time in enterprise level implementations or even like SMB implementations, we do prefer having a team and then assigning adding the users to the team, and then having roles to, assigning security roles to the team, basically the owner team. So within the team, if you have a team, it's easy to maintain, and within the team we will have two types of team, like owner team and access team. So Dataverse offers these two options. So the owner teams are the one who will have the users under them, and you can assign security roles to the team directly. In that way, whichever and the records like opportunity records or anything can be owned by the team as well. Okay, and we can also schedule the team, in case of service scheduling or something like that. And the access team is basically, we cannot directly grant security roles. You need to create access team templates. And then, similar to field security profile, we basically assign those access to them there. And that's why you cannot directly own, but the main objective of having this access team is to basically, instead of directly sharing the records to individual resource, if possible, we can basically, create them in their access team and share it to them. That will have a good, that will not impact performance much. That's why you can see when it will be used, owner team will be created if you know the team structure, hierarchy, or the team members already. In that case, definitely owner team is an option. And if you do not know, if you're dynamically going to create and dissolve the team, access team is an option. And then the next one is, the secure business rules. So basically, business rules It's it's part of the logic section, which we just saw as the Dataverse. And the business rules basically provides a simple interface, right, to implement and maintain a fast changing create a code and maintain by the business itself. It doesn't require any code to be done. It's just kind of a drag and drop feature. So it has 3 scopes within it. So if you create a business rule within a specific form, let's say an account form, it runs, let's say a main main form of an account, it runs only within that form. If you have it for all the forms, it basically runs in all the forms of the specific entity. And if you keep it, and these two are at client level, right? So if you do any server side update or create, definitely this will not be helpful when you have in this scope. But when you have a business rules at entity level or table level scope, even from the backend, when you do a creator update, still the business rule will be respected. And so what it can do, what it cannot do, basically it can hide. It's fortunate that it got hide. So basically it can hide and show a field. It can enable and disable a field, and it can show an error message. It's called clear and set a field, and it can make a field required or not required. And you can see these 3 are right now not supported in Canvas app, but it's supported in model-driven app. Hopefully it will be supported soon. And the multi-select option set is not supported. And what it cannot do, basically, apart from fields, it cannot access the tabs and sections. Yeah, and then it cannot access the fields that are not added to the forms. So for a business rule to apply, the field should be on the form. And if a business rule is set on the field and the field is changed, and if there is any JavaScript on that field, it will not be triggered. So basically, business rule cannot trigger JavaScript. And business rule cannot act on related entities. It works only within the same entity. And it runs whenever the form loads and whenever the field value changes, except entity scope, which runs in the backend as well. And then quickly we can see calculated field and roll-up field and auditing. I'll just take 2 more minutes. And calculated field is basically lets you to automate a manual calculation, right? So if I just go to this scenario sample, maybe that will be helpful to understand. So you can see how without creating any code or anything like that, I'm able to do an automation calculation with just kind of this. So here what I'm doing is we are using fields of the originated lead of an opportunity to calculate the appropriate date to follow up. Okay, so if the original lead is equal to immediate, we basically set it to follow up create as next 7 days from the created date. If it is greater than, let's say 100,000, then we are giving some time to basically for the customer, and then we are saying the follow-up date as 1 month from the created date. This way, the follow-up date is automatically calculated based on the pre-conditional logics, and we are not writing any code for this. And there are certain limitations. I cannot go one by one now, but I'll be sharing the slide as well to the Raj later. So the maximum number of fields can be 5, and what I can say is we cannot trigger the workflow and plugin on the calculator field, and duplicate detection rule cannot be triggered. And there are some other limitations, considerations as well, as is shown here. And then the roll-up field is basically, and again, it's to without any code or custom code. Dataverse offers this feature where you can aggregate the values of the child, and you can show it there. For example, if you take again here, what it's doing is it's basically calculating all the open revenue for all the associate the parent account and the child account as well. So the opportunities that is owned by the parent accounts basically. So if whichever if there's an account and the account has a parent accounts, and if each of these accounts has this opportunities, this roll-up will calculate the open revenue of all these accounts, opportunities that's owned by these accounts, and that's what it's basically doing there. So basically, it's an aggregator function, and Dataverse gives this, and roll-up field can do sum and count, min and max and average. Okay, and there are certain things to this. So basically, this runs every 12. That's a job runs behind the scene to keep it updated. It runs every 12 hours, or it can be run on demand as well. And these are some limitations in roll-up fields in what are the data type it can run, and calculator fields what are data types it can run. It can be created. And finally, audit and logs. This is the last slide for now. And you can basically enable audit to track changes for your organization data and maintain a log of changes, right? So this is an important feature when it comes to security, extended version of security, I would say, because auditing feature logs changes that are made to the customer records and user access so that you can review the activity later. It is designed to meet compliance, security, and governance policies. So you have to be very careful when you delete the audit log. You can no longer view the audit history for the period covered by that audit log. So some of the operations that audit log can be audited, like create and delete deactivated delete operations, and changes to the sharing privilege and associations, and changing to security roles. And once you have the audit, you can see the audit summary, on your environment and settings, and you can expand it and see it. So like a typical administrator scenario, like which user is accessing my system and when, who has updated this field, what was the previous field before this, what action the user has taken recently on this one, so who deleted this record. So all these questions can be answered by getting into the audit logs. So with that, I've stopped my presentation. I know I exceeded, I overrun by 3 minutes, and apologies for that, Ras and the next presenter.
Thank you very much, Jiva and Geeta. So that was another whirlwind tour. You covered some really good concepts actually that complemented the previous session before on how to consider structuring the data within Dataverse for modeling your customer data. So that was really timely to cover that as well. So once again, guys, thank you so much. Really, I think this was a very highly beneficial session. A lot of people are interested in this session, so I've shared the link for the people to share, and everyone who shares the event out to the community, we will be sharing the video to them. So anyway, once again, thank you, Jiva and Geeta, joining us all the way from Singapore, and we're over to the next session now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ras. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And please feel free to share